The Vendetta of Sarah. In a city ruled by shadows, Sarah, a quiet seamstress, loses her younger brother to the hands of a ruthless crime lord. The law offers no justice. The streets whisper fear. Everyone tells her to move on, but Sarah's silence hides a storm. She begins her vengeance not with weapons, but with patience. Night after night, she trains a hawk, once her brother's pet, to strike at the sound of a whistle. She feeds it only after it tears apart a straw dummy bearing the crime lord's likeness. Months turn into years, and her hawk becomes a blade in the sky, precise and merciless. When the time is right, Sarah lures the crime lord into a celebration, offering him a garment embroidered with symbols of loyalty. But hidden in the folds is a scent only the hawk knows, the scent of prey. As music fills the hall, her hawk dives, striking the crime lord in front of his men. Panic erupts, and in the chaos, Sarah slips into the night, her brother's memory finally avenged. Episode 1: Blood on the Pavement. They say some deaths echo louder than the living, but what happens when that echo belongs to the only family you have left? Welcome to the Vendetta of Sarah, a tale of love, vengeance, and tragedy. Stay with me, because what begins with blood on the pavement will spiral into a storm no one in this city is ready for. Please don't forget to drop a like, subscribe if you haven't, and turn on your notification bell. Let's dive into the story. The city moved like any other day. Merchants shouting prices, children chasing stray dogs, the endless thrum of footsteps and cartwheels. Sarah stood outside her little seamstress shop, her eyes following her younger brother Daniel as he ran across the square. His laughter carried like sunlight, warming a corner of Sarah's grief-hardened heart. But then, like thunder splitting a clear sky, the sound of gunfire shattered the air. 3 black sedans screeched to a halt, doors flung open. Men in dark coats, faces carved with cruelty, stepped out like shadows made flesh. They didn't hesitate. They didn't even look around. They raised their guns. And Daniel fell. The world seemed to tilt. One moment he was running, the next his small body lay twisted on the stones, crimson blooming beneath him like a cruel flower. Sarah's scream cut through the chaos as she sprinted forward, shoving through the stampede of terrified citizens. She dropped to her knees beside him, cradling his trembling body, her hands already drenched in his blood. Daniel's lips moved, broken words struggling against the weight of death. "Sarah, don't cry." His eyes searched hers one last time, then dimmed like fading embers. The gunmen lowered their weapons. One smirked as he spat on the ground. "Victor Drazi sends his regards. Next time, keep your family out of business you don't understand." They climbed back into their cars and vanished, leaving nothing but screams, silence, and Sarah on the blood-soaked stones. She rocked Daniel's body, her tears mixing with his blood. Around her, the city watched in silence, afraid to move, afraid to speak. Sarah raised her head slowly, her face streaked with grief, yet carved in something colder. Her trembling hand closed Daniel's eyes, and her voice broke the silence, barely more than a whisper but sharp as steel. "You will not die in vain." Episode 2: The Widow's Warning. What happens after a vow is made in blood? When grief hardens into silence, and silence sharpens into resolve? This is the Vendetta of Sarah. If you thought episode 1 was heart-shattering, stay with me, because Sarah's vow will draw her into a world of shadows, secrets, and an ally no one could predict. The square was empty now, except for the stains of her brother's blood drying on the stone. Sarah sat motionless, her whispered vow still hanging in the air like smoke that refused to fade. Her hands trembled as she closed her shop's door, shutting out the whispers of neighbors too afraid to help, too afraid to care. But one voice refused to stay silent. A frail knock rattled her door. When Sarah opened it, a hunched figure stood in the doorway. Mrs. Kalia, the widow who had lived next door since Sarah was a child. Her eyes, clouded but sharp, scanned Sarah's face and the blood still smeared on her dress. "You must not," Mrs. Collier rasped, gripping Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. "The Drazi family is untouchable. Don't even think of revenge, girl. You'll only end up like him, cold, forgotten, and feeding the crows." Sarah's jaw clenched, her silence cutting deeper than any words. The old woman's warning was not cruel, only weary, a survival carved into her bones from watching too many innocents disappear. She pressed a worn crucifix into Sarah's hand before shuffling away into the night. The house was too quiet when Sarah entered. Every corner seemed to ache with memories of Daniel, the laughter that once echoed there, the tools he left scattered, the sketches of birds he had taped to the walls. Her grief pressed heavy on her chest until she could hardly breathe. But then, faintly, she heard it. A rustling sound from the back room. Slow, cautious, she followed it. The air was stale with dust and grief, but when she pushed the door open, her heart faltered. There it was. A hawk, perched on the broken wooden beam, its feathers dark as midnight, its eyes burning with a wild fire. Daniel's hawk, the one he had raised from a fledgling, the one he loved more than anything. Somehow, it had returned. The bird tilted its head, studying her in eerie silence. Sarah stepped closer, and it didn't flee. Instead, it let out a sharp cry that echoed through the ruined house, a sound that sent a shiver racing down her spine. Sarah reached out slowly, her blood-stained hand trembling as the hawk spread its wings. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. It wasn't just an animal looking at her. It was as if Daniel's spirit had carved itself into this creature, waiting for her. Her chest tightened. The warning of Mrs. Collier still echoed. Don't even think of revenge. But Sarah's gaze locked with the hawk's, and in that fiery stare she saw no warning, no fear, only hunger, only rage. The hawk's piercing eyes locked onto Sarah's, as if it already knew. It would be her weapon. Episode 3. The First Training. What if grief could be forged into a weapon? What if the very thing your enemy ignored became the blade at their throat? This is the Vendetta of Sarah. Episode 3 takes us deeper, where Sarah's silence sharpens into action and the shadows begin to notice. Don't look away, because the hunt begins here. The hawk's eyes burned into hers, fierce and unrelenting, as if it had chosen her in that instant. Sarah's trembling hand lowered slowly, but her heart was no longer weak with grief. It pulsed with dangerous resolve. Daniel's bird was no longer a memory. It was a promise. Days bled into nights, and Sarah returned again and again to the abandoned clearing near the edge of the forest. The city's whispers called her a widow of vengeance, but she gave them no words, no explanations. Instead, she carried scraps of food and something darker, a rag torn from Daniel's blood-stained clothes. She tied the rag to a stick, holding it aloft as the hawk circled above. Her whistle cut through the silence, sharp and clear. The bird plummeted, talons tearing into the cloth with a fury that made Sarah's chest tighten. Each shred that fell to the dirt felt like an oath being carved into the night. She repeated it again and again, her hands blistering, her voice hoarse from whistling. She never rewarded the hawk until the rag was shredded beyond recognition. Hunger sharpened its strikes. Violence became its language. And with every session, Sarah's reflection in its eyes looked less like a seamstress and more like a predator. But vengeance is never silent for long. The forest that had hidden her training was not empty. Unseen in the shadows, a figure watched. A man cloaked in black, with the insignia of a dagger tattooed on his wrist, the mark of Drazi's spies. His lips curled into a smirk as he watched the hawk dive and tear, again and again. He had seen enough. Quiet as the night, he turned back toward the city, carrying with him a secret that could shatter Sarah before her vengeance even began. The hawk shrieked into the night, but Sarah froze mid-whistle. For the first time she felt it, the weight of unseen eyes. Someone was watching. Episode 4, Shadows at Her Door. When vengeance stirs, shadows awaken, and in a city ruled by fear, even silence has spies. This is the Vendetta of Sarah. Episode 4 uncovers the moment when grief turns dangerous, and danger comes knocking at Sarah's very door. The hawk shrieked again, its wings slicing through the moonlight. Sarah lowered her whistle, her eyes scanning the tree line. Her breath came fast, her gut twisting. She had felt it. Someone watching. The forest was thick with silence, yet every rustle, every crack of a twig sounded like betrayal. But nothing emerged. Only shadows. Only silence. Still, she did not linger. Gathering her things, Sarah slipped back into the city's veins under the cover of night, her heart pounding with a truth she couldn't yet name. The Drazi were already watching. The next morning, her shop was quieter than usual. She stitched a hem with trembling hands, the needle piercing cloth, thread, until the sound of heavy boots shattered the calm. The bell above the door rang, not with the timid jingle of a customer, but with the sharp authority of men who did not ask for entry. 3 of them, Drazi's men. Their coats dripped with arrogance, their eyes scanning her small shop like wolves in a pen of lambs. One leaned against the counter, knocking over a jar of buttons just to hear them scatter. Another fingered a bolt of silk, slicing it with a knife as though daring Sarah to protest. "Such a shame," the first one drawled. "Your brother. Wrong place, wrong time." He smirked, the words tasting like poison. "Victor says, 'Let the dead stay buried. Forget the past. Or you'll join him under the ground.'" The second man chuckled, his eyes narrowing. "Pretty little seamstress like you. Best to keep those hands for sewing, not plotting." Sarah said nothing. Her lips pressed thin, her eyes fixed on the needle in her hand. Her silence unsettled them, though they would never admit it. After a few more cruel laughs and a warning muttered in Victor's name, they left, the echo of their boots lingering long after the bell stilled. The shop returned to its fragile quiet, but Sarah's hands shook, not from fear, but from rage restrained. She locked the door, the air thick with her brother's absence. Slowly, with deliberate movements, she walked to the back of her work table. She pulled open a drawer. Beneath folded fabrics and scraps of thread lay something hidden, something Daniel had left behind. A leather-bound book, worn at the edges, stained by time and secrets. Sarah traced the cover with trembling fingers before opening it. The first page was filled with Daniel's handwriting. Lists, notes, markings of names. Not just names. Enemies of Victor Drazi. People who had suffered under him. People who had scores left unsettled. Sarah's breath caught as she realized her brother hadn't just been a victim. He had been preparing something. And now, those names were hers to claim. Episode 5. The Secret Pact. What if the dead left behind not silence, but a map of vengeance? And what if following it meant shaking hands with the devil himself? This is the Vendetta of Sarah. Episode 5 uncovers the first dangerous bond that will sharpen Sarah's vengeance and place her on a knife's edge with no return. Sarah's fingers trembled as she turned the brittle pages of Daniel's diary. Each name leapt off the paper, etched in his handwriting with angry precision. Merchants ruined by Drazi's extortion, families torn apart by his violence, and in the margins, sketches of patterns, plans half-formed, threads her brother had not lived to tie together. But one name was underlined again and again: Elias Vaynar. Once Victor's right hand, now a ghost whispered of in the underworld, a man scarred by betrayal, said to have vanished into the city's gutter alleys. Sarah closed the book with steady resolve. If her brother had trusted this name, then so would she. That night, she ventured into the city's underbelly, past the crumbling taverns, past the smell of iron and smoke, into a back street where the lamps were long dead. There, in the corner of a ruin, she found him. Elias. His face was a map of scars, his eyes sharp as broken glass. He sat with a bottle in one hand and a knife in the other, as if both were equally necessary to breathe. When Sarah approached, he didn't rise, only watched her with the suspicion of a man who had buried too many friends. "I know who you are," he rasped before she could speak. "The sister, the girl with the dead brother." Her throat tightened, but she met his gaze. "My brother trusted you. He wrote your name. He believed you weren't finished with Victor Drazi." A silence stretched, heavy as a blade. Elias chuckled bitterly. "Your brother was a fool. He thought he could play in a war that already swallowed greater men than him." Sarah stepped closer, her voice sharp as steel. "Then let me be the fool now. I don't want your pity. I want your help. I want to learn." Elias studied her, his eyes flicking to the hawk perched silently behind her. Its feathers bristled, its gaze as fierce as her own. Something in that image made his smirk fade. "Train a hawk," he muttered, "to kill a king." He rose at last, his scarred hand brushing the hilt of his knife. "Fine, I'll show you how to sharpen its fury, but understand this, seamstress." He stepped close enough that Sarah could smell the burn of whiskey on his breath, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "But if Victor finds out, we both die." Episode 6. A Blood Debt. What if your brother's death wasn't fate, but punishment? What if he had stumbled on a secret so dangerous it sealed his grave? This is the Vendetta of Sarah. Episode 6 uncovers the blood debt that sparked it all, and the secret that could bring Victor Drazi's empire to its knees. Elias's words lingered in the stale air. "If Victor finds out, we both die." His scarred face twisted into something between pity and warning. But Sarah did not flinch. Instead, she held his gaze until he sighed and lowered himself back onto the broken chair. "You want truth?" he muttered, running a finger over his jagged scars. "Fine, I'll give it to you. Your brother didn't die because of a street squabble, girl. He died because he saw what he wasn't meant to see." Sarah's breath caught, her fists clenched at her sides. "What did Daniel see?" Elias leaned forward, his voice dropping to a growl. "Victor's betrayal. The Drazi don't just rule this city, they sit at the council's table. Blood, money, power. They divided among themselves. But Victor grew greedy. Your brother found proof. Letters, accounts, shipments moved in secret. He tried to warn someone. Maybe even me. But Victor found out first." The room felt colder, the shadows heavier. Sarah's throat tightened as Elias went on, his voice like a blade dragged across stone. "Your brother was marked the moment he uncovered that truth. Victor wanted to make an example, to show the council that no rat, no whisperer, survives." Sarah's chest heaved, fury building like a storm she could barely contain. Her grief sharpened into something harder, heavier. Then Daniel died carrying a debt. Not his. Victor's. Elias's lips curled in a grim smile. "Now you understand. This isn't just blood. It's a blood debt. And debts demand to be paid." When Sarah returned home that night, the diary felt heavier in her hands, as if Daniel himself had pressed it into her palms. She sat at her work table, candlelight flickering across the worn pages. Her eyes scanned every line, every name, every desperate note. Then her fingers stopped. Wedged between the pages, hidden under a loose scrap of fabric, was something she hadn't noticed before. A folded sheet of parchment, covered in strange markings, lines of numbers, broken phrases, symbols half-scribbled. At first glance, nonsense. But Daniel's handwriting scrawled in the corner made her heart seize. His weakness. Never let them see this. Her hands shook as she held it closer to the flame. It wasn't just notes. It was a code, a secret Daniel had died to protect. And in its patterns, Victor Drazi's greatest weakness waited to be unlocked. Episode 7, The Betrayer's Son. What if the key to destroying your enemy wasn't a weapon, but their own blood? This is the vendetta of Sarah. In Episode 7, Sarah steps closer to Victor's empire by befriending the one person who could open every locked door, the crime lord's son. The coded letter burned in Sarah's pocket like a live coal. Night after night, she pored over its numbers and symbols, but the key to unlocking it remained hidden. She knew one thing. Daniel hadn't died for nothing. His final clue pointed to Victor's greatest weakness. All Sarah needed now was a way inside. That door came in the form of Marco Drazi. She first saw him at the edge of the market, standing apart from his father's men. Unlike them, his posture carried no arrogance. His suit was sharp, but unkempt, his eyes dark with something heavier than pride. He was Victor's son, yes, but estranged, a rumor whispered often in hushed voices. Marco hated his father. Sarah moved carefully. She approached under the guise of trade, offering to mend a tear in his jacket. Ashamed to let fine cloth fall apart, she said, her voice steady, almost casual. Marco studied her, suspicion flickering, then softened. Perhaps it was her simplicity, or the way grief hid in her eyes like a shadow. Days turned into weeks. Each encounter was small, innocent, a repaired cuff, a quiet conversation in the market square, an accidental crossing of paths near the river. Marco began to linger. He asked questions, not about her past, but about her thoughts. Her views on the city strangled by his father's reign. Sarah answered carefully, weaving threads of truth with lies, painting herself as nothing more than a seamstress struggling to survive. Trust grew like a dangerous seed. Marco shared pieces of his world, his discontent, his distance from Victor. She listened, heart pounding with every word, masking her purpose behind nods and faint smiles. She knew she was weaving a different kind of garment now, one of deception, with each lie stitched tighter than the last. One evening, as the sky blushed crimson and the streets quieted, Marco lingered outside her shop. His voice was low, heavy with something long buried. "You know," he murmured, avoiding her gaze, "everyone thinks being Victor Drazi's son means power. But they don't know the truth." Sarah leaned in, pulse quickening. Marco finally turned, bitterness etched across his face. His words dropped like a blade between them. "I hate my father, too." Episode 8, The Hawk Strikes. What if vengeance could no longer stay hidden? What if one strike could turn whispers of rebellion into a storm of fear? This is the vendetta of Sarah. In Episode 8, Sarah's silent training erupts in public chaos, and the city learns that Victor Drazi's empire is not untouchable. Sarah held Marco's gaze after his whispered confession, "I hate my father too." The words rang inside her like a warning and an opportunity. She hid her racing thoughts behind silence, but her mind spun. Marco's hatred made him useful, yet it also made him dangerous. Trust was a weapon, and Sarah knew how to wield it. But vengeance could not wait. Daniel's memory demanded blood, and now the city was about to taste it. The festival of St. Aurelia lit the streets in ribbons of firelight and music. Lanterns floated in the air, laughter rang out, and for once, the city forgot its chains. Sarah moved through the crowd unnoticed, her cloak drawn close, her whistle cool between her lips. The hawk circled high above, a shadow against the moon. Victor's lieutenants strutted among the people, drunk with wine and arrogance, their presence a reminder of who owned the streets. One in particular, Lorenzo, the man who had laughed as Daniel bled on the pavement, stood near the main square, boasting loudly, coins spilling from his pockets as he gambled with the locals. Sarah's hand clenched around the hidden whistle. Her pulse drummed in her ears. Tonight, the hawk would taste its first kill. She lifted her eyes to the sky. The hawk tilted its wings, waiting. Sarah's breath caught as she placed the whistle to her lips and blew. The note sliced the air. From above, the hawk dove, silent as death. In one savage arc, its talons ripped across Lorenzo's throat. The man staggered, hands clutching his neck as crimson sprayed against the festival's lantern light. Screams split the music. Children shrieked. Women scattered. The hawk rose again, shrieking triumphantly as panic swallowed the square. Sarah slipped into the chaos, her face calm, her heart aflame. Daniel's name burned like justice in her chest. But the night did not end in silence. High above the chaos, Victor Drazzi himself emerged from a balcony overlooking the square. His men dragged Lorenzo's lifeless body into the street. Victor's voice thundered over the terrified crowd, every word dripping with venom. "Find the assassin!" he roared, his eyes blazing. "And when you do, I will tear them apart piece by piece." Episode 9, Love and Lies. What happens when vengeance collides with the heart? When the enemy you've sworn to destroy shares blood with the one you can't stop thinking about? This is The Vendetta of Sarah. Episode 9 pulls us deeper into the fire, where Sarah's mission sharpens even as her heart betrays her. Victor's roar still echoed in the city's bones. His vow to shred the unknown assassin into pieces spread like wildfire through taverns and alleys. Fear thickened the air, and Drazzi soldiers combed the streets with eyes like wolves. But Sarah's face remained hidden, her hands steady, her secret hawk already back in the shadows. Yet her heart was not steady. Marco came to her often now, sometimes with a torn sleeve that needed mending, sometimes with nothing more than silence he seemed desperate to share. He carried his father's shadow like a curse, and Sarah found herself listening, sympathizing, even laughing softly at his dry humor. She told herself it was part of the plan, that every smile she gave him, every glance that lingered too long, was just another step toward Victor's downfall. But when Marco looked at her, really looked at her, Sarah felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Warmth. Dangerous warmth. It didn't go unnoticed. One night, Elias cornered her in the dim workshop, his scarred face grim. He had been sharpening her hawk's training with ruthless precision, but his voice now cut sharper than any blade. "You're slipping," he said. "The way you look at him. It's not strategy anymore." Sarah stiffened, but Elias pressed on, his words heavy with warning. "You're falling for the enemy, Sarah, and that will get you killed, or worse, make you forget why you started all this." Her jaw tightened, denial hot on her tongue, but she swallowed it. Elias wasn't wrong. The line between duty and desire was blurring, and it terrified her. The next day, she saw the truth of it laid bare. She had followed Marco through the market, her distance careful, her face hidden beneath her cloak. He walked with an unease that told her he was dreading something. And then, in the square near Victor's estate, she saw it. Victor himself stood waiting. His iron presence made the crowd bend back in fear, yet Marco approached without flinching. For a long, silent moment, father and son stared at each other. And then, Victor pulled Marco into his arms. Sarah's breath caught. The monster she longed to kill was the father of the man she was beginning to love. Her heart split between vengeance and betrayal, Sarah whispered to herself, trembling. "What have I done?" Episode 10. The trap is set. What if the very gift of peace was designed to kill? What if a cloak meant for reconciliation became a shroud of death? This is the vendetta of Sarah. In episode 10, Sarah's hands craft not comfort, but a weapon disguised in silk and thread. The stage is set for her most daring strike yet. Her body still shook from the image burned into her memory. Victor, the monster, pulling Marco into his arms. The embrace was brief, stiff, almost unnatural, but it was enough to unravel Sarah's steel. The man she was falling for carried the blood of the very devil she had sworn to destroy. Back in her shop, her hands moved over fabric, needle flashing through thread, but her mind was chaos. Each stitch was a battle. Each tug of the thread felt like her heart was being ripped in two. That night, Marco came to her. His voice was softer than usual, almost pleading. "I want him to trust me again. Just once. Maybe if I show him I'm not against him." He paused, glancing at her workbench. "You're gifted, Sarah. Could you make something for him? A cloak, perhaps. A peace offering." The request sliced her soul open. It was Marco asking. His faith in her was unshakable. But Sarah's silence hid something darker. This was not just another garment. This was the weapon Daniel's ghost demanded she craft. She agreed, and the trap began. For days she worked tirelessly, weaving fine black fabric with intricate embroidery that shimmered faintly in the light. But hidden beneath the beauty was death. Sarah laced the folds with a secret, a faint trace of the hawk's trigger scent. To the eye, it was loyalty. To the hawk, it was prey. Elias visited, watching her work with grim understanding. "One mistake, and the hawk will strike the wrong man," he warned. Sarah didn't answer. Her hands were steady now. They had to be. Finally, the cloak was finished. An elegant masterpiece worthy of a king, yet deadly as a dagger. Marco delivered it with pride, believing it to be a bridge between father and son. Sarah's heart twisted as she watched him leave with it, knowing what fate the cloak carried. Later that evening, word reached her ears through whispers in the market. Victor Drazzi himself had taken the gift. Inside his towering estate, lit by chandeliers dripping with gold, Victor's men gathered as the crime lord unfolded the garment. His cold eyes scanned the stitching, his fingers tracing the embroidery. For the first time in years, he allowed a smile to touch his face. Victor Drazzi draped the cloak over his shoulders, admiring the weight and elegance. "A fine gift," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "Fit for a king." Episode 11. The Hawk's Wrath. What if vengeance struck in front of the entire city? What if one scream of feathers and steel shattered a king's illusion of immortality? This is the Vendetta of Sarah. Episode 11 unleashes the storm Sarah has been training for, the moment where silence turns into blood and the shadows ignite in chaos. Victor Drazzi stood at the head of the banquet hall, the embroidered cloak gleaming beneath the chandeliers. Around him, the city's most powerful men drank and laughed, their goblets raised to the empire he commanded. Musicians played, dancers spun, and not a single guest dared lower their eyes from the spectacle of Victor's reign. But high above, beyond the glittering chandeliers, another guest watched. A predator. Sarah's hawk circled silently in the rafters, its keen eyes locked on the scent hidden deep within the folds of the cloak. Every beat of its wings carried the weight of Daniel's memory, sharpened into fury. Sarah herself waited outside in the shadows of the courtyard, her whistle pressed tight against her lips. She had stitched her vengeance into silk and thread, and now she would rip it free. She blew. The sound was lost in the laughter of men and the clash of goblets, but to the hawk it was a clarion call. With a shriek that cut through the music, the bird dove. Glass shattered, wine spilled, screams erupted as the hawk tore downward like a blade from heaven. Its talons raked across Victor's shoulder, shredding fabric and flesh in one violent strike. Blood splattered across the banquet table as Victor staggered back, his roar echoing louder than the panicked guests. The hall erupted in chaos. Chairs overturned, men scrambled for cover. Women screamed as guards drew weapons and swiped desperately at the bird, which wheeled and struck again, ripping deeper into its prey. But Victor Drazzi was not so easily felled. Wounded, blood dripping down his arm, he seized the table and shoved it aside with brute strength, his eyes blazing with unbroken fury. He was gravely wounded, but alive. And the hawk was not his only enemy that night. In the confusion, Sarah caught sight of a nightmare. Elias. He had come closer to ensure the plan unfolded, but the guards had seen him. Rough hands dragged him across the marble floor, his face bloodied, his voice hoarse as he screamed her name. "Sarah! Sarah!" Her heart froze in her chest as his cry rang through the night. Heads turned. Suspicion cut like a knife through the hall. Victor's men hauled Elias away, his voice breaking into a desperate howl. "She's the one! Sarah!" Episode 12. The Devil's Bargain. What if vengeance demanded a price you weren't ready to pay? What if the devil you sought to kill decided to make the entire city bleed until he found you? This is the Vendetta of Sarah. In Episode 12, Victor Drazi tightens his grip on the city. Marco faces an impossible choice. And Sarah learns that vengeance spares no one. The banquet was left in ruins. Blood on silk, shattered glass across marble floors, and Victor Drazi wounded but standing. His cloak hung in tatters where the hawk had struck, but his eyes burned hotter than ever. Dragged before him, Elias was thrown to the ground, his face battered, his hands bound. Victor's voice thundered above the terrified guests. "You think a bird can kill me. You think shadows can undo the Drazi name." His gaze swept across the hall, daring anyone to look away. "No. This city is mine, and until the assassin reveals themselves, the streets will burn." His men cheered, their boots stomping the marble as if it were a war drum. The feast became a battlefield, and by morning, every alleyway of the city was crawling with Drazi soldiers, tearing through homes, dragging men from their beds, demanding whispers of Sarah's name. But Sarah remained hidden, her heart torn in two. Marco came to her in secret. His eyes stormed with conflict. "You have to tell me the truth," he whispered, his voice breaking. "That hawk, it was yours, wasn't it?" Sarah's silence was her only answer. Marco turned away, his hands trembling. "Do you understand what this means? If my father learns the truth, he'll kill you. And if I protect you, he'll kill me too." His face was pale, hollow with the weight of bloodline and betrayal. Sarah reached for him, but he pulled back. The bond they had built was unraveling, thread by dangerous thread. And then, the horror came. At dawn, the city was forced into the central square. Children, mothers, merchants, everyone was herded like cattle to witness Victor's wrath. At the center, bound to a wooden post, stood Elias. His scarred face bore no fear now, only defiance. Victor's voice carried like a blade through the hushed crowd. "This man harbored my enemy. For that, he dies. Let all who dare defy me remember his end." Sarah stood hidden among the crowd, her cloak hooded, her fists clenched so tight her nails cut into her palms. She wanted to scream, to stop it, but she couldn't move. The executioner raised the blade. A heartbeat later, Elias's cry was silenced. His body slumped forward as blood soaked the stones. Sarah bit her lip until it bled, her tears hidden in shadow, as Victor raised his hand to the people and roared, "This is only the beginning." Episode 13. A Son's Betrayal. What if the only person you dared to trust was the one who broke you? What if love itself became the blade pressed against your throat? This is The Vendetta of Sarah. In Episode 13, Marco learns the truth, and Sarah's heart shatters under the weight of love, lies, and betrayal. The square still reeked of blood. Victor's roar echoed through the city like a curse, and Sarah stumbled through the alleys, her cloak clinging to her like a shroud. Elias was gone. The only man who had stood beside her, who had sharpened her vengeance, silenced beneath Victor's blade. She wanted to scream, to unleash the hawk on the city itself, to drown the streets in blood. But vengeance had taught her patience. So she returned to the shadows of her workshop, her hands trembling over torn fabric, her tears stitching themselves into silence. It was there Marco found her. He burst through the doorway, his chest heaving, his eyes not soft with affection this time, but sharp with fury. In his hand, he clutched something. A fragment of embroidered cloth, torn from the cloak Victor had worn at the banquet. Sarah froze. His voice was low, raw. "It was you. All this time, it was you." The room tilted around her. She wanted to deny it, to weave a lie as she had so many times before, but her strength broke. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Yes, Marco, it was me, and I would do it again. Your father killed Daniel. He killed Elias. He's poisoned this city with his cruelty." Marco's face twisted, torn between rage and grief. Sarah's eyes filled with desperate tears. "Come with me," she whispered, clutching his arm. "We can leave this city, escape his shadow. You don't owe him your soul, Marco. You never did." For a long, fragile moment, silence bound them. Marco stared at her, his breath shaking, his hand rising to her cheek. And then he kissed her. It was soft, broken, filled with every unsaid word between them. Sarah's heart soared and shattered at once. But love can be a dagger. When Marco pulled back, his eyes were wet, but cold. He stepped away, his lips trembling with betrayal. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered, his voice breaking as he turned toward the door. "But I have to tell my father where you are." Episode 14, Fire and Feathers. What happens when betrayal sets the match and vengeance fans the flame? This is the Vendetta of Sarah. In episode 14, fire consumes everything Sarah has built, and feathers become her weapon of wrath. The words still echoed like a knife in her chest as Marco disappeared into the night. Sarah stood frozen in her workshop, every fiber of her being begging her to run after him, to drag the truth from his lips, to beg him to take it back. But deep down she knew, the betrayal had already begun. The first torch hit her door before dawn. Flames devoured the wood with a hungry roar, smoke curling through the cracks of her workshop. Sarah coughed violently, grabbing the cage where her hawk beat its wings in panic. She flung the door open only to be met by Victor's men, their silhouettes dark against the rising fire. "She's inside! Burn it to the ground!" one shouted. Heat swallowed her. She ducked beneath a falling beam, clutching the hawk to her chest as sparks rained across her hair and skin. Pain seared her arm, her side. She screamed but refused to fall. Every stitch of fabric, every secret weapon, every memory of her brother burned behind her as she stumbled into the alley, half blind with smoke. Her hawk shrieked, its feathers singed but its eyes still fierce. Sarah's breath came ragged, her skin blistered, her heart pounding not just with pain but with rage. They had taken Daniel. They had taken Elias. Now they had burned her sanctuary. No more patience, no more waiting. With trembling hands, she pulled the small vial of scent trigger from her scorched cloak and smeared it across a shard of silk. She raised the hawk high into the night, her voice hoarse but commanding. "Find him." The bird launched into the smoke-filled sky like a shadow with burning eyes. The city festival was in full swing across the square, Victor surrounded by laughter, wine, and family, unaware of the storm descending. The hawk cut through the air and dove, talons gleaming, its cry piercing the night. But it wasn't Victor who fell screaming. The hawk struck his daughter, a young woman draped in emerald silk, laughter still on her lips as she crumpled beneath the predator's claws. The square erupted in shrieks. Blood stained the stones. Sarah staggered into the shadows, watching through tears of rage and pain. She hadn't meant for it to be her. But vengeance once unleashed does not choose its prey. And then she heard him. Marco's scream cutting through the chaos, his voice breaking with horror. "You've doomed us all!" Episode 14, Fire and Feathers. What happens when betrayal sets the match and vengeance fans the flame? This is the Vendetta of Sarah. In episode 14, fire consumes everything Sarah has built, and feathers become her weapon of wrath. The words still echoed like a knife in her chest as Marco disappeared into the night. Sarah stood frozen in her workshop, every fiber of her being begging her to run after him, to drag the truth from his lips, to beg him to take it back. But deep down she knew the betrayal had already begun. The first torch hit her door before dawn. Flames devoured the wood with a hungry roar, smoke curling through the cracks of her workshop. Sarah coughed violently, grabbing the cage where her hawk beat its wings in panic. She flung the door open only to be met by Victor's men, their silhouettes dark against the rising fire. "She's inside! Burn it to the ground!" one shouted. Heat swallowed her. She ducked beneath a falling beam, clutching the hawk to her chest as sparks rained across her hair and skin. Pain seared her arm, her side. She screamed but refused to fall. Every stitch of fabric, every secret weapon, every memory of her brother burned behind her as she stumbled into the alley, half blind with smoke. Her hawk shrieked, its feathers singed but its eyes still fierce. Sarah's breath came ragged, her skin blistered, her heart pounding not just with pain but with rage. They had taken Daniel. They had taken Elias. Now they had burned her sanctuary. No more patience, no more waiting. With trembling hands, she pulled the small vial of scent trigger from her scorched cloak and smeared it across a shard of silk. She raised the hawk high into the night, her voice hoarse but commanding. "Find him." The bird launched into the smoke-filled sky like a shadow with burning eyes. The city festival was in full swing across the square, Victor surrounded by laughter, wine, and family, unaware of the storm descending. The hawk cut through the air and dove, talons gleaming, its cry piercing the night. But it wasn't Victor who fell screaming. The hawk struck his daughter, a young woman draped in emerald silk, laughter still on her lips as she crumpled beneath the predator's claws. The square erupted in shrieks. Blood stained the stones. Sarah staggered into the shadows, watching through tears of rage and pain. She hadn't meant for it to be her. But vengeance once unleashed does not choose its prey. And then she heard him. Marco's scream cutting through the chaos, his voice breaking with horror. "You've doomed us all!